For centuries, the church has screamed about the devil. They've painted him red. They've given him horns and a pitchfork. They've made him the ultimate villain in a simple moral play. You resist temptation. You obey the rules. You get salvation. It's a tidy story. It's a story designed to keep you looking in the wrong direction. But what if I told you the true power, the deeper fear, wasn't the devil at all? What if a force far older, far more subtle, held humanity in its grip? A force that predates Christ. A force that shapes your very perception of reality. A force the Vatican feared more than eternal hellfire. The ancient prison warden. Imagine ancient scholars. They're not painting demons on church walls. They're poring over forbidden texts. These old manuscripts whisper of Saturn. They speak of Saturn as the Lord of Time. They name him the Keeper of Souls. These titles made even the most hardened theologians restless. They found secrets buried in pre-Christian writings. Saturn wasn't just a distant planet. It wasn't just another god. These texts described a cosmic energy, a force that literally imprisoned human souls. It held them in endless cycles of coming back to life. It trapped them inside physical matter itself. Think about that for a moment. This was a theological nightmare. If Saturn controlled how souls entered and left bodies, what did that mean for Christian salvation? The church had built its entire structure on a promise. Christ's sacrifice freed souls from bondage. But these ancient sources suggested an older jailer, a warden whose power was millions of years older than any church dogma. Public sermons focused on resisting sin, but in the Vatican's hidden libraries, desperation grew. Scholars searched for ways to break Saturn's stranglehold. They wanted to free human consciousness from this ancient prison. This wasn't simple astrology. This was about something far more significant. The church's deepest fear was losing control of the afterlife itself. Time's Hungry Maw. Picture the most disturbing image from old stories. A wild-eyed father. Blood drips from his mouth. He is eating his own newborn child. He consumes it whole. This wasn't just a barbaric tale. The Greeks didn't tell it around campfires for simple horror. The myth of Kronos, devouring his children, represented something deeper. It was a cosmic rule. Ancient people understood it with chilling clarity. We have almost completely forgotten it. Kronos was time itself. He received a prophecy. One of his children would overthrow him. His solution? He ate each child the moment it was born. But most people miss the true horror of this myth. Kronos wasn't just eating babies. He was consuming potential. He devoured possibility. He swallowed the future itself. Time, in this ancient understanding, wasn't a neutral background. It wasn't just where life happened. Time was an active, hungry power. It systematically destroys everything it touches. The Romans inherited this deep understanding. They connected it directly to the planet Saturn. Saturn was the slowest moving object in the night sky. It took almost 30 years to complete its orbit. That's an entire human generation. Ancient skywatchers watched this dim, distant wanderer. They saw something menacing in its slow pace. Other planets danced quickly. Saturn ground forward. It moved with the inexorable patience of death itself. In Babylonian texts, dating back over 4,000 years, Saturn was called Ninurta. He was the god of farming, war, and boundaries. But these weren't separate ideas. The Babylonians understood they all showed the same rule. The imposition of limits on infinite possibility. A farmer creates lines in the earth. He divides wild land into controlled plots. A warrior creates divisions between nations through conquest. And Saturn, they believed, created divisions around human souls. It trapped them in cycles of life and suffering. But here's where it gets truly interesting. Saturn wasn't seen as purely evil. Ancient astrologers understood its cosmic role. It was the great teacher. If you are beginning to feel the weight of these ancient truths, if something deep inside you is starting to recognize these patterns in your own life, then you are ready for more. Make sure you subscribe to this channel. This space is for those who dare to look beyond the surface, for those who seek the real knowledge that challenges everything. We're just getting started. The mind's constricting chains. Medieval Islamic astrologers built on Greek and Babylonian ideas. They developed the most advanced understanding of Saturn's hold on the mind. They called Saturn the planet of qabd. That means constriction or contraction. Saturn, they taught, created the inner voice of limitation. It was the psychological mechanism. It kept people trapped in normal ways of thinking. It was Saturn's influence. It made people accept their situation. It made them doubt their own abilities. It made them submit to authority without questioning. Think about your own internal critic. The voice that tells you you can't. The one that says, it's too risky. That's Saturn working within you. That's its influence making you your own jailer. The most fascinating Islamic texts on Saturn's mental hold contained methods. They taught how to break free from these inner chains. But these methods were too controversial. Mainstream platforms would never allow them. Roman religious art shows Saturn's powerful image clearly. In countless sculptures and paintings, Saturn looks like an old man. He holds a scythe. He isn't just cutting grain. He is cutting down lives. He is destroying human potential at its peak. The scythe became Saturn's main symbol. It showed the planet's true function, the systematic destruction of growth and possibility. Gothic cathedrals across Europe used Saturn's symbolism. It was built into their very structure. The huge stone supports held up these massive buildings. They followed Saturnian rules. They were external constraints. They prevented inner collapse. Medieval builders understood limitation could create, restriction could allow transcendence. The cathedral walls kept worshippers contained, but they also lifted their eyes toward heaven. This is where Saturn's influence becomes truly unsettling. It doesn't just create outer limits, it creates inner ones. Modern psychology would call this the superego. It's the inner voice of authority. It constantly judges, it restricts, it controls how we act. Saturn makes us our own prison guards. It convinces us that our limits are natural. It tells us they are necessary. It even makes us believe they are good. The false god's creation. The Gnostic traditions went even further. They linked Saturn to the Demiurge. This was the false god. He created this flawed material world. It was a prison for divine souls. Gnostic texts describe Saturn as the archon of time. This cosmic entity trapped souls in linear existence. It made them forget their divine origin. It forced them to accept material limits as the ultimate truth. This is exactly what made Saturn so threatening to early Christian teachings. Christianity promised salvation. It came through Christ's action in linear time. One life, one death, one resurrection. This would redeem all human souls. But Saturn's archetype suggested something far more complex, something deeply unsettling. Time itself was a trap. Souls were caught in endless cycles of coming back to life. Liberation required not divine grace, it required individual gnosis. It demanded direct knowledge of one's spiritual nature. The Vatican's fear of Saturn wasn't just abstract ideas. It was a recognition. Saturn's archetypal power directly undermined Christianity's core promises. If Saturn truly governed the cycles of coming back to life, then Christ's sacrifice was just one event. It was part of an endless cosmic drama. If Saturn's influence could only be overcome through individual spiritual work, then the Church's role became questionable. And if Saturn's psychological grip could be broken through ancient practices and hidden knowledge, then the Church's control over salvation was in serious trouble. This ancient understanding of Saturn as the cosmic timekeeper, this planetary force that binds souls to material existence, it does so through cycles of limitation and pain. This was only the start of the Vatican's worries, because, as we will see, certain groups throughout history didn't just understand Saturn's power, they learned to control it. The devil's utility, Saturn's threat. Picture two chess masters. They sit across from each other. One plays by rules everyone knows. The other moves pieces by laws most people don't even know exist. That's the difference. That's how the Vatican saw the devil versus Saturn. Understanding this difference shows everything. It reveals why one became Christianity's public enemy. The other was quietly buried in theological notes. The devil, as Christianity built him, was almost perfect. He served the Church's needs. Think about Satan's basic nature in Christian belief. He is an outside tempter, a fallen angel. He whispers in your ear. He tries to lead you astray. But here's the crucial part. You can say no. The entire Christian struggle against evil rests on this idea of choice. You can pray. You can fast. You can seek advice from your priest. You can do acts of penance. The devil works in the realm of moral decisions, and the Church positioned itself as your vital partner. It was your ally in this cosmic fight. This wasn't accidental. The devil's story of rebellion actually supported the very power structure the Church needed. When Lucifer fell from heaven, the story goes, it was because he refused God's will. Moral rebellion against divine authority leads to damnation. Every Sunday sermon about Satan's temptations carried this hidden message. Stay within the fold. Trust the Church's guidance. Then you will be safe from darkness. The psychological brilliance of this system is clear. It creates dependency. Fighting the devil requires community. It needs guidance. It demands the sacraments. Only the Church can provide these. You can't fight Satan alone. You need the body of Christ. You need the help of saints. You need the protective rituals. These turn ordinary believers into spiritual warriors. The devil made the Church indispensable. But Saturn played by completely different rules, and those rules threatened to make the Church pointless. Where the devil offered temptation you could resist, Saturn represented something far more subtle. The very structure of material existence itself. You weren't fighting Saturn's influence. You were living inside it, every moment of every day. Saturn controlled time, and time was aging your body, whether you prayed or not. Saturn ruled limitation, and you were bound by physical laws, regardless of your faith. Saturn controlled karmic outcomes. Your past actions created your present situation. This happened through mechanisms that worked completely outside of Christian redemption. This is where the Church's carefully built beliefs began to crack. Because if Saturn's influence was real, if cosmic forces shaped human experience by rules thousands of years older than Christianity, then what was the Church's role in salvation? The ancient understanding of Saturn suggested that earthly life itself was a form of spiritual captivity. Your soul was trapped in matter. It was bound by time. It was subject to decay and death, not because of Adam's sin, but because of fundamental cosmic principles. These governed all manifestation. The material world, including the Church's earthly power, its physical buildings, its human structure, was part of the prison, not the key to escape. Even more threatening was Saturn's link to knowledge and gnosis. The devil could be fought with faith and obedience, but rising above Saturn's influence required direct spiritual understanding. You needed to grasp the actual workings of cosmic law. You had to see the real structure of spiritual captivity. You needed the genuine methods of soul liberation. This knowledge couldn't be given through institutional channels. It had to be experienced directly, individually, through practices and insights that went around church authority entirely. Consider how the church handled these different threats. Against Satan, they launched public campaigns. They published detailed accounts of demonic possession. They created elaborate exorcism rituals. They built entire systems around spiritual warfare. The devil was useful. Fighting him pulled people deeper into church dependence. But Saturnian knowledge? That was suppressed quietly, systematically. Ancient texts vanished into Vatican vaults. Scholars who studied cosmic influences were accused of heresy. Knowledge of planetary forces, of astrological timing, of the soul's link to cosmic cycles. All of this was gradually pushed underground. It was called superstition or devil worship. The Demiurge's grip. The beliefs went even deeper. Saturn's link with fate and predestination caused huge conflicts. It clashed with Christian ideas about free will. If your life was shaped by planetary forces that began before your birth, if your spiritual challenges were set by cosmic timing that worked with mathematical precision, then where was the role for divine grace, as the church defined it? The differences between these two forces created opposite relationships with institutional power. When you fight the devil, every victory makes you need the church more. It reinforces your need for its protection and guidance. You become more dependent, more thankful for the support that helped you resist temptation. But when you work to rise above Saturn's influence, every breakthrough increases your spiritual independence. You become less reliant on outside power. You rely more on direct spiritual knowing. This is why Saturn was an existential threat. It menaced church power in ways the devil never could. The devil's influence could be overcome through more faith and church involvement. But Saturn's influence could only be transcended through understanding. That understanding made the church's role unnecessary. The ancient initiates who worked with Saturnian knowledge understood something the church couldn't afford for it to become common knowledge. Spiritual freedom needed you to understand the actual structure of cosmic captivity, not just to believe in set doctrines. They knew that the soul's travel through material life followed laws. These could be studied, understood, and eventually transcended through direct ducis. When you grasp this difference, you begin to see why the church was fine making the devil a household name, while ensuring Saturn's deeper meaning stayed hidden in plain sight. One enemy strengthened their power. The other threatened to make that power completely useless. The devil could be managed. He worked within the systems that kept the church in control. But Saturn suggested that the prison itself needed to be understood. Only then was real freedom possible. When early Christian leaders found Gnostic texts describing the Demiurge, they faced something far more dangerous. It was worse than any devil they could imagine. Here was a way of thinking. It didn't just challenge specific doctrines, it completely flipped their understanding of reality. The Gnostics taught that our material world wasn't God's creation at all. It was the work of a false deity. They called him the Demiurge. This cosmic builder had made physical reality. It was an elaborate prison. It trapped divine souls in bodies of flesh. It kept them busy with material things. What made this teaching absolutely terrifying to church leaders was this: Saturn's ancient symbols aligned perfectly. They matched every part of this demiurgic function. Think about Saturn's traditional areas: time, limitation, structure, karma. and material manifestation. The Gnostics said the Demiurge worked through exactly these mechanisms. In the Apocryphon of John, one of the most detailed Gnostic cosmologies, the Demiurge creates time itself as a trap. It's a linear path. It keeps souls focused on past and future. It distracts them from the eternal present. That's where true spiritual awakening happens. Saturn, as Kronos, literally shows this same rule of temporal imprisonment. The hypostasis of the archons goes even further. It describes how the Demiurge maintains control. It uses methods we might recognize as distinctly Saturnian. It creates material desires. These keep souls always seeking satisfaction in the physical world. It sets up karmic debts. These require many returns to life to resolve. Most importantly, it keeps up the illusion that matter is real and that spirit is abstract. Gnostic teaching said the opposite was true. A different kind of salvation. Imagine how this would have looked to a 4th century bishop. He was trying to establish church authority. If the Demiurge truly ruled the material world, then every earthly institution, including the church itself, might be serving the forces of spiritual captivity instead of liberation. The whole idea of religious hierarchy, with its focus on worldly power and material wealth, suddenly, it looks suspiciously like demiurgic manipulation. The Gospel of Philip makes this link clear. It describes how the God of this world, clearly the Demiurge, works through religious institutions. It keeps people spiritually asleep. It creates elaborate rituals and doctrines. These focus attention on external forms, not on inner transformation. Does that sound familiar? The Gnostics were arguing this point. Organized religion, especially when it stressed obedience to earthly authority over direct spiritual experience, was itself a demiurgic trap. This is where Saturn's alchemical symbolism becomes vital. Medieval alchemists always linked Saturn to the prima materia. This was the base matter. It had to be transformed to achieve spiritual gold. They understood Saturn. It was both the prison and the key to freedom. Recognizing the illusion of material limits was the first step. It led to genuine spiritual freedom. The church couldn't completely suppress this knowledge. It was part of the astrological and alchemical traditions. They sometimes used these for their own ends. When the Cathars appeared in medieval France, they brought these Gnostic principles. They confronted Catholic authority directly. They taught that a false god created the material world. They said the church's focus on worldly power showed its link with demiurgic forces. They believed salvation required seeing matter as illusion. The church's response was the Albigensian Crusade. But here's what made the Saturn Demiurge link particularly disturbing. It offered a psychological explanation. It explained why people stayed trapped in spiritual ignorance. The Demiurge wasn't just an outside force. It represented the part of consciousness, the part that keeps up the illusion of separation, Saturn's astrological influence, its effect on fear, limitation, and material attachment. This perfectly described the psychological mechanisms. These mechanisms keep souls imprisoned in matter. The Pistis Sophia, another important Gnostic text, describes how the Demiurge uses time itself. It is a weapon against spiritual awakening. It creates the illusion of linear progress. It makes souls believe they need to gather experiences, knowledge, or merit over time. This is how they will achieve salvation. But gnosis, direct spiritual knowing, exists outside time entirely. This teaching made church involvement not just unnecessary, it made it actively harmful. Imagine the implications for Christian belief. If matter was a trap created by a false god, what did that mean for the incarnation? How could God become flesh if flesh itself was a demiurgic prison? The Gnostics had an answer. Christ came not to bless matter. He came to show the way out of it. His resurrection wasn't about spirit triumphing over death. It was a demonstration. Consciousness could transcend material limits completely. The Hermetic traditions grew strong during the Renaissance. They carried these same ideas forward. They used Saturn symbolism. The Saturnian path involved seeing material limits as an illusion. It meant working through karmic patterns to gain freedom. It meant ultimately transcending time itself. These weren't just abstract ideas. They were practical spiritual tools. They helped break free from demiurgic control. What terrified church leaders most was this. This framework remained so persuasive. Every time people experienced spiritual awakening, it came through direct inner work, not through church channels. They were essentially proving the Gnostic critique. Every mystic who rose above material concerns, they did it through contemplation. They showed that salvation didn't need institutional help. The cycles of return. The psychological side adds another layer of threat. If Saturn represents the part of consciousness that keeps up separation and limitation, then Saturn worship, in its deeper sense, meant working directly with these psychological mechanisms. This was spiritual technology. It made priests unnecessary, rituals optional, church authority irrelevant. When you understand Saturn as the Demiurge, you realize why the Vatican's fear ran so deep. They weren't just worried about competing ideas. They were facing a complete alternative reality, one that made their entire worldview look like an elaborate spiritual trick. The devil, by comparison, was a manageable enemy. He worked within their cosmic understanding. But the Demiurge suggested their understanding itself was the trap. The moment you grasp Saturn's connection to coming back to life and karma, everything becomes absolutely clear. The Vatican's fear. It's not about some obscure theological debate. This strikes at the very core of Christian power. Imagine this. You are a medieval peasant. The church tells you this single lifetime determines your eternal fate, heaven or hell. It's based on your obedience to church rules. It's based on your involvement in their sacraments. That's scary enough to keep anyone in line. But then, imagine discovering this. Your soul has lived countless lives before. This existence is just one classroom. It's part of an infinite school of spiritual growth. And you don't need any intermediary. You will eventually graduate. That's exactly what Saturn's ancient associations revealed. That's why the church worked so hard to hide this knowledge. In Hindu tradition, Saturn is called Shani. He is the great teacher. He binds souls to the wheel of karma. He does this until they learn what they need. They must learn to rise above material life completely. Every action creates consequences. These must be balanced across many lifetimes. Saturn doesn't punish without reason. It ensures perfect cosmic justice. It uses the mechanism of coming back to life. Miss the lesson in this life, you'll get another chance, and another, until you finally understand. Buddhism takes this even further. The entire concept of samsara, the cycle of suffering and rebirth, operates under Saturn's rule. But here's what made the church's thinkers sleepless. Buddha taught that freedom from this cycle comes through direct spiritual work, not through any outside savior, not through any institution. You achieve awakening by understanding suffering, by practicing compassion, by developing wisdom across many incarnations. The Hermetic traditions thrived before Christianity became dominant. They saw Saturn as both prison warden and ultimate liberator. Yes, Saturn's influence keeps souls trapped in material life, but only until they become spiritually mature enough. They must mature enough to rise above those limits. Think of it like a cosmic graduation system. You don't leave kindergarten until you master its lessons, no matter how many times you repeat the grade. This created an absolutely devastating problem for early Christianity. If souls come back to life until they reach spiritual perfection, What happens to the urgency of salvation? Why would anyone fear eternal damnation? They would know they'd get endless chances to get it right. More importantly, why would they need the church's sacraments? Its prayers? Its forgiveness? When the universe itself provided a perfect education system. The practical effects were even more threatening. Saturn's lessons naturally developed spiritual maturity, discipline, responsibility, facing limits, learning through hardship. Ancient mystery schools taught initiates to work consciously with Saturn's energy. They used its restrictions as a gymnasium for soul development. They understood Saturn's apparent cruelty was actually cosmic compassion. It forced growth that wouldn't happen through comfort alone. Consider the Eleusinian mysteries. They operated for almost 2,000 years. Then Christianity suppressed them. Initiates learned that death was simply a shift. It was a move between classrooms. Consciousness continued its education. It happened across many returns to life. And Saturn's apparent obstacles were actually curriculum. They were designed to develop specific spiritual abilities. These weren't abstract beliefs. They were direct experiences. They changed how people understood existence itself. The Cathars in medieval France showed how dangerous this knowledge became. It surfaced within Christian lands. They taught that souls came back to life. They did so until they became pure enough to escape material existence entirely. They saw the physical world as Saturn's domain. It was a necessary but temporary school. Souls eventually graduated from it. They did so through direct spiritual development. The Catholic Church launched the Albigensian Crusade. It was specifically to eliminate this teaching. They killed hundreds of thousands of people, all to stop these ideas from spreading. Even within Christianity, mystics kept finding these concepts. Origen, an early church father, taught about the pre-existence of souls. He taught about their eventual universal salvation. It would come through many chances for redemption. The church condemned these teachings as heresy, precisely because they undermined the fear-based control system. A single lifetime salvation provided that control. Here's what the church understood. But it couldn't publicly admit it. If Saturn's karmic system was real, then Jesus' sacrifice became just one teaching method among many, not the only path to salvation. Souls could achieve freedom. They could do it through Buddhist meditation, through Hindu yoga, through Hermetic initiation, or countless other approaches. Across many lifetimes, Christianity became optional, not essential. The deeper fear was even more fundamental. Saturn's teachings about coming back to life suggested something. Spiritual authority came from direct experience. It came from inner development, not from institutional position, not from reading scriptures. A simple farmer, one who had lived many lives, one who had learned Saturn's lessons. He might have more real spiritual wisdom than the Pope himself. This flipped the entire hierarchy, the hierarchy that Christianity depended upon. Mystery schools taught that Saturn's ultimate gift was this. It taught souls to become their own spiritual authorities through countless lives of learning Saturn's lessons, accepting responsibility, working within limits, developing patience and discipline. Souls naturally grew beyond the need for outside guidance. They became spiritually self-sufficient. This made all religious institutions ultimately unnecessary. This is why the Vatican's libraries hold thousands of confiscated texts. They are about coming back to life, about karma, about Saturn's role in soul evolution. They didn't destroy this knowledge because they thought it was false. They suppressed it because they knew it was true, and that truth would end their control over salvation. The question becomes this: what other spiritual truths have been hidden to maintain institutional power? Because once you truly understand how coming back to life and karma really work, you start realizing this. Your spiritual growth has been happening much longer than this single lifetime, and Saturn has been your teacher all along. If you find yourself drawn to these deeper secrets, to the hidden knowledge that can truly transform your understanding of existence, then explore our playlist on esoteric knowledge and demonology. You'll find the link in the pinned comment. The black cube in your reality. The black cube stands as Saturn's most powerful symbol, and once you grasp what it represents, you'll never look at certain religious practices the same way again. In sacred geometry, the cube shows something troubling: the crystallization of infinite spirit into finite matter. Think about it. A sphere has endless points of contact with space. It is flowing and boundless. But a cube, 6 faces, 12 edges, 8 corners, everything locked into rigid, precise mathematics. This is the geometric image of consciousness being trapped in physical form. Walk into any major city. You will find black cubes everywhere. Corporate headquarters love them. The most famous one sits in the desert of Saudi Arabia, the Kaaba in Mecca. It is draped in black cloth. Millions of pilgrims walk around it. They may not realize they are taking part in one of humanity's oldest forms of Saturn worship. The word Kaaba literally means cube in Arabic. For over 1,000 years, people have been walking in circles around this black cube. Their movements mimic the orbital mechanics. Ancient skywatchers saw these in Saturn's slow journey through the heavens. But it doesn't stop with Islam. Jewish prayer involves tefillin. These are small black leather cubes. They hold sacred texts. They are bound to the forehead and arm during morning prayers. The Holy of Holies in Solomon's temple. A perfect cube, 20 cubits in length and height. The most sacred space in ancient Judaism was literally a cube. It housed the presence of the divine in geometric form. I spent years studying these patterns. Then I realized what I was actually seeing. These aren't just coincidences. They aren't cultural borrowings. They are expressions of a fundamental truth. A truth about the nature of reality. It goes beyond any single religion. The cube represents the binding of spiritual energy into material form. Exactly what the Gnostics warned about. They spoke of souls being trapped in matter. Corporate America has unknowingly kept these symbols alive. With remarkable consistency, Time Warner's logo was a stylized black cube for decades. The old A-Tan building in New York, a huge cube, even children's toys. Building blocks are almost always cubes. They train young minds to think in terms of rigid, divided structures, not flowing, organic forms. Then there's the hexagon, Saturn's other signature. NASA's own images show a perfect hexagonal storm system. It's at Saturn's North Pole. This geometric formation shouldn't exist, not by normal weather science. Yet there it spins, a 6-sided pattern. It keeps its shape for decades. And where do we find hexagons in human culture? The Star of David. It's made of 2 interlocking triangles. They form a hexagonal center. Benzene rings in chemistry. Honeycomb structures. The hexagon appears wherever nature or human consciousness tries to impose order on chaos. Ancient cultures understood Saturn's influence far more directly than we do now. Roman Saturnalia wasn't just a winter festival. It was a temporary reversal of social order. It recognized Saturn's role. He was the great equalizer, the force that ultimately brings all things to their appointed end. Masters served slaves. Social ranks disappeared. For a brief moment, people lived outside the strict rules, the rules that normally governed their lives. The Babylonians called Saturn Ninurta, the god of boundaries and limits. Their priests knew this. Saturn's influence created the very idea of this far and no further. Farming, law, social order, all fell under Saturn's control. All needed limits on natural chaos. Celtic Druids watched Saturn's 29-year cycle. They used it to time major social and farming changes. What truly fascinates me is this. Mystery schools used Saturn symbolism in their initiation rites. They understood something crucial. You cannot transcend limitation until you fully grasp it. Masonic lodges still use cubic stones in their ceremonies. They represent the rough stone. It must be perfected through spiritual work. The candidate must symbolically die to their old self. This is a process of spiritual crystallization. It mirrors Saturn's influence. Before they can be reborn into higher consciousness. Walk through any major cathedral. You'll find Saturn symbols hiding in plain sight. Gothic architecture loves the cube, the hexagon, the rigid mathematical relationships. These create those soaring spaces. Rose windows often have hexagonal patterns. Floor tiles arrange themselves in cubic forms. The church used these ancient symbols, while publicly denying their cosmic importance. This created a fascinating tension between hidden knowledge and public doctrine. Secret societies kept Saturn traditions alive. They ran parallel to mainstream Christianity for centuries. The Knights Templar, the Rosicrucians, various Hermetic orders. They all understood. Saturn represented both the prison of material existence and the key to rising above it. Their symbols, their rituals, their architectural preferences, all showed this deeper cosmic knowledge. Modern psychology has started to see this. Ancient wisdom traditions always knew it. Symbols affect consciousness. They work at levels far below rational thought. When you surround people with cubes and hexagons, with rigid geometric forms, you are subtly programming their minds. You make them think in terms of limits, of boundaries, of control. The spread of these symbols in corporate and governmental buildings, it isn't by chance. It's a continuation of an ancient understanding, an understanding of how geometric forms influence human consciousness. The most unsettling realization: these symbols work, whether you believe in them or not. They operate through what Carl Jung called the collective unconscious. They trigger responses that bypass rational thought entirely. Every time you interact with these forms, you are taking part. You are in humanity's oldest conversation, a conversation about spirit and matter, freedom and limitation, the infinite and the bounded. Understanding Saturn's symbolic presence doesn't mean rejecting all structure or all geometric form. It means recognizing the conversation, a dialogue that has been happening around you your entire life, a dialogue between cosmic forces and human consciousness. It plays out through symbols, through architecture, through ritual practices. These connect our modern world to humanity's deepest spiritual concerns. The question isn't whether you'll find these symbols. They are woven into the very fabric of civilization. The question is whether you will recognize them for what they are: ancient keys to understanding the cosmic forces that shape human consciousness, and the eternal tension between spiritual freedom and material existence. The path to self-mastery. Throughout history, the Vatican preached salvation through faith alone, but a parallel spiritual tradition quietly thrived, one that understood Saturn not as humanity's cosmic jailer, but as the ultimate spiritual teacher. These weren't devil worshippers. They weren't heretics. They were sophisticated practitioners. They recognized that Saturn's apparent restrictions actually held the keys to transcendence itself. The ancient Egyptian priesthood first wrote down this understanding. It was in the temple complexes of Karnak and Dendera. Initiates underwent what they called the Saturn trials. These were long periods of isolation, of sensory deprivation, of confronting their deepest fears. But here's what made these practices truly revolutionary. They found this by willingly embracing Saturn's lessons of limitation and discipline. They could transcend those very limitations. The god Set, often misunderstood as purely destructive, he was actually their image of Saturn's dual nature, the force that both binds and liberates. When Rome conquered Egypt, the Collegia, These were elite mystery schools within the Roman religious system. They adopted these practices. They built underground temples. Members would spend months in Saturn-aligned meditation chambers. They emerged with deep insights about time, about karma, about spiritual evolution. These weren't casual spiritual seekers. We're talking about senators, military commanders, influential merchants. They understood that true power came from mastering Saturn's teachings about patience, about strategic thinking, about long-term planning. The medieval period saw perhaps the most refined expression of Saturnian spirituality. The cathedral builders of Europe weren't just following Christian architectural plans. They were encoding advanced geometric principles. These were based on Saturn's orbital patterns and astrological links. Notre Dame, Chartres, Canterbury Cathedral. Look at their floor plans. You'll find octagonal patterns, specific proportional relationships, orientation angles. These aligned with Saturn's position during certain times of year. These were not accidents. They were built by initiated craftsmen who understood sacred geometry. They saw it as a technology for spiritual transformation. The guild system itself showed Saturnian principles. Master stonemasons, metal workers, architects. They went through 7-year apprenticeships. This period matched Saturn's traditional cycle of spiritual testing. During this time, they learned more than just technical skills. They learned hidden practices, how to work with Saturn's energy during construction, how to fill buildings with specific vibrational qualities, how to create spaces that would help cause altered states of consciousness in those who entered them. Renaissance Italy brought this tradition into its most precise form. Figures like Marsilio Ficino, Pico della Mirandola, Cornelius Agrippa. They developed what they called Saturnian magic, not supernatural tricks, but sophisticated psychological and spiritual disciplines. Ficino's 3 Books of Life contains detailed instructions for working with Saturn's influence, specific eating habits, meditation techniques, even musical compositions, all designed to bring human consciousness into harmony with Saturn's frequency. These Renaissance magi understood something the church desperately wanted to hide. Saturn represented the principle of earned wisdom, of transformation through challenge, of spiritual authority, an authority based on direct experience, not on institutional position. They practiced voluntary poverty, long meditation retreats, and what they called philosophical melancholy. This was a state of consciousness. It allowed them to see reality beyond the everyday. The results were clear. Saturn-initiated individuals consistently showed remarkable abilities, uncanny strategic insight, the power to influence others through their presence, not just by force, and most threatening to church authority, the ability to cause genuine spiritual transformation in others without relying on sacraments, without priests, without institutional involvement. But here's where it gets truly fascinating. These Saturnian practitioners didn't always work outside the church. Many worked within it. Medieval monasticism, with its focus on discipline, on giving things up, on contemplative practice, it was essentially Saturnian spirituality, disguised in Christian words. The Benedictine rule, the Carthusian silence, the Franciscan poverty. These were all ways of using Saturn's teaching, the teaching that spiritual freedom comes through chosen limitation. Certain monastic orders became centers of Saturnian practice. The Cistercians, known for their building innovations and their farming advances, they were applying Saturn-based principles of working harmoniously with natural cycles and limits. Their monasteries became places of learning. They explored consciousness. They developed what we would now call advanced meditation techniques, energy work, even early forms of psychological therapy. The church hierarchy knew exactly what was happening. Vatican records hold many documents. They show concern about too much contemplation and dangerous new spiritual practices. They weren't worried about these monks becoming less Christian. They were terrified. These practices were creating Christians who no longer needed the church's mediation. They could access divine consciousness on their own. This tension reached its highest point during the Inquisition. History records the persecution of obvious heretics, but a more subtle campaign targeted Saturnian practitioners, even those within orthodox institutions. Mystics like Meister Eckhart, he taught direct experience of divine consciousness. He found himself under investigation, not for denying Christian doctrine, but for making it irrelevant through superior spiritual technology. The modern continuation of these traditions might surprise you. Certain Jesuit practices, Ignatian spirituality, even parts of Catholic contemplative tradition, they contain clear Saturnian elements. The 30-day Ignatian retreat, with its focus on isolation, self-examination, and facing personal limitations. It follows the classical Saturn initiation pattern almost exactly. Contemporary esoteric orders, from the Rosicrucians to certain Masonic lodges to modern mystery schools, they keep these practices alive in more direct forms. They understand Saturn as what the alchemists called the great work, the process of changing base consciousness into spiritual gold. It happens through disciplined practice and through a willing acceptance of necessary limits. The deep irony is this: the Vatican spent centuries fighting Saturn-based spirituality, yet it may have been fighting the very force, the force that could have raised Christianity. It could have made it a truly transformative spiritual technology, instead of fearing Saturn's teachings about karma, about coming back to life, about earned wisdom. The Church could have used these ideas. It could have built a more complete understanding of spiritual growth. Today, institutional religion continues to fade. We see new interest in these ancient Saturnian practices. People are finding again that real spiritual growth needs exactly what Saturn teaches: patience, discipline, the willingness to face limits, and the understanding that true freedom comes not from avoiding restrictions, but from mastering them. The hidden history shows this. Humanity has always had the tools for spiritual freedom. The question now is this: will we have the wisdom to take them back? The ultimate truth. Now we reach the core truth: why the Vatican's fear of Saturn was greater than even their worry about the devil himself. What I am about to share will fundamentally change everything. Everything you think you know about spiritual authority, about salvation, about the very nature of human consciousness. The Church could handle the devil. He fit perfectly into their belief system. Satan tempts humans. Humans sin. The Church provides salvation through sacraments and obedience. It's a closed loop. It reinforces church power at every turn. But Saturn represented something far more menacing: a complete cosmic system, a system that made the Church's entire salvation apparatus not just unnecessary, but potentially harmful. Think about what we've discovered through this investigation. Saturn governs time itself, the very medium through which human consciousness experiences reality. Unlike the devil, he might tempt you towards specific sins. Saturn controls the fundamental structure, the structure within which your soul operates. Every moment of your existence, it happens within Saturn's temporal domain. Every decision, every consequence, every karmic debt, all of it processed through the cosmic machinery that Saturn oversees. Here's where it gets truly unsettling for traditional Christian theology. If Saturn owns souls, it does so through time and karmic law, rather than the devil owning them through sin. Then the entire framework of Christian salvation becomes irrelevant. The Church teaches that faith, obedience, and participation in sacraments, these lead to eternal salvation. But what if these very practices, What if they actually reinforce the spiritual imprisonment, the imprisonment that keeps souls trapped in Saturn's cycles? Consider the psychological mechanisms at work. The Church stresses outside authority. You need the priest. You need the institution. You need the approved beliefs to reach God. This creates spiritual dependence, a state where individuals never develop the direct connection to cosmic truth, the connection that genuine liberation requires. Instead of encouraging the inner alchemical work, the work that could rise above Saturn's limits, institutional religion keeps consciousness focused on external approval and on following rules. The Gnostics understood this distinction clearly. This explains why the Church hunted them with such fury. Gnostic traditions taught that salvation came through direct knowledge. Gnosis, knowledge of cosmic reality. They recognized that souls could become trapped in material existence. They were trapped through ignorance of their true nature, and liberation required understanding the cosmic forces. The forces governing, coming back to life. This wasn't heresy to the Gnostics. It was the fundamental spiritual science, the science that the Church systematically suppressed. Now we can understand this. Why the Vatican removed reincarnation from Christian doctrine. It happened in the 6th century. If people understood that consciousness moves through many lifetimes, accumulating experiences, working through karmic patterns, they might start asking uncomfortable questions about the cosmic forces governing this process. They might realize that a single lifetime of faith and obedience couldn't possibly address the deeper spiritual work, the work required for genuine transcendence. The one-life salvation model serves Saturn's purposes perfectly. It keeps souls focused on immediate religious compliance, rather than the long-term spiritual growth, the growth that could lead to freedom from the reincarnation cycle entirely. Heaven and hell become simplified destinations. They distract from the more complex reality, the reality of consciousness evolving through many lives, all under cosmic law. Here's the truly shocking implication. Institutional religion itself might function as part of Saturn's control system, not through a conscious conspiracy, but through structural dynamics, dynamics that maintain souls in states of spiritual dependence. The emphasis on faith over direct experience, authority over personal gnosis, and external salvation over internal transformation. All of these characteristics align perfectly. They align with keeping consciousness trapped in limitation, rather than encouraging genuine transcendence. This changes religious history in startling ways. The persecution of mystery schools, the suppression of sky knowledge, the demonization of practices that connected individuals directly with cosmic forces. Suddenly, these actions look different, less like protecting orthodox faith, more like preventing recognition of the true nature of spiritual imprisonment. The practical implications transform everything about the spiritual journey. If Saturn maintains systematic control over human consciousness, it does so through the very structures of time, matter, and coming back to life. Then liberation requires understanding cosmic law, not just accepting religious doctrine. It demands direct work with the forces governing consciousness, not just faith in institutional intermediaries. This is why Saturn-oriented traditions developed sophisticated practices for rising above temporal limitation, meditation techniques for moving beyond time-bound awareness, astrological knowledge for understanding cosmic influences, alchemical work for transforming consciousness itself. These weren't primitive beliefs. They were technologies for spiritual liberation, technologies the Church couldn't allow to spread. The psychological dimension of this recognition creates both deep challenges and ultimate opportunities. At first, seeing the extent of cosmic imprisonment can feel overwhelming. If Saturn controls the fundamental structures of reality itself, how can individual consciousness ever achieve genuine freedom? But this knowledge also provides the key to transcendence. For those willing to undertake the difficult work, unlike the devil, he works through temptation. He can be resisted through moral choice. Saturn's influence requires more sophisticated understanding. You can't simply choose to escape time or karma through willpower. Freedom demands developing the inner capacities that can rise above these cosmic limits. The direct perception of consciousness beyond temporal existence, the understanding of karmic patterns, the understanding that allows true resolution, not endless repetition. The ancient traditions knew this work was possible. They developed practices. They preserved knowledge, specifically for souls ready to undertake the journey beyond Saturn's domain. But they also understood why this knowledge had to be protected. Not everyone is ready for the responsibility that comes with cosmic awareness. This brings us to the ultimate truth. The devil might tempt individuals occasionally, but Saturn has maintained systematic influence over human consciousness since birth. It does so through the very fabric of incarnate existence. Time shapes how we think, karma governs what we experience, and the cycle of death and rebirth keeps consciousness engaged with material reality, rather than recognizing its transcendent nature. Yet this understanding, while initially disturbing, offers something the Church's salvation model never could: genuine spiritual freedom. For those willing to develop the capacities required, not freedom granted by external authority, but freedom achieved through direct understanding of cosmic law and through the patient work of consciousness transformation. The Vatican feared Saturn because Saturn represented knowledge that could make their entire institutional apparatus obsolete, not through rebellion or rejection, but through transcendence, souls simply growing beyond the need for external spiritual authority altogether. If this investigation into the Vatican's deepest fears has opened new perspectives on spiritual reality for you, let us know by commenting. Tell me, what truth resonated with you the most?